I have spent a lot of time absolutely glazing Risk of Rain 2 over the last few months, recently reviewed some negative reviews, and of course I was biased. I intentionally ignored the valid criticisms just to roast people who downvote a game because of a buyout or because they suck. The game has problems. Lots and lots of problems. We know this, but I don't really care about bugs or glitches. I'm talking about core gameplay issues that become more and more apparent the more you play. I realize I'm not a smart enough player to have a deep understanding of the intricate mechanics of the game, so I'll attempt to give some credit where credit is due, but before I jump in, I need to shout out the modding community of Risk of Rain 2. Y'all out there still creating mods are the absolute best. I love you and never change. There is so much love for this game. The modding community has created many mods that improve or solve many of the issues that I will describe below in the form of alternative methods or just removing them entirely. Pillars. But just because there are mods that make the game better, that doesn't make any of my points moot. If the game has problems, it has problems. We shouldn't just hide behind mods as a solution to a broken game. The first one here is a little bit weird. The game lacks variety. Now, I've spent a lot of time laughing at people who said this in their negative review. And the truth is, they're kind of right. But they were right in the wrong way. The game obviously has variety. There are 150 items and 40 pieces of equipment. No two runs will ever end the same, but they kind of actually do if you think about it. Once you get a good understanding of how the characters work and what the items do, you will inevitably gravitate towards the better items and builds for that character. And usually that winds up being the same every time. I mean, sure, you can say, oh, I'm not going to pick up bands with loader, but we all know that's not true at all. You're going to do it. I so frequently find myself just playing until I can get gasoline, safer spaces, one of those ridiculous items, and then you're just set for the rest of the run. You can just coast. Further, outside of the heresy items, there aren't really many interesting core character changing items like in a Binding of Isaac. What I mean here is that the good items are really just to help you shoot faster, help you move faster. Sometimes you shoot some missiles out, generate explosions on kill, you can get chain lightning, that kind of thing. There's really not a lot of depth to it. The game really seems like it needs some more dynamic items that change sort of the fundamentals of the character you're playing, but I will say, the flashy explosions and bright lights are pretty nice. The other thing is that after you start looping, the game just sort of plays itself. The other lacks variety criticism is around the stages themselves. I'll be honest, I don't really feel this criticism in Risk of Rain 2. There are so many great maps that I would love to play over and over. Rally Point Delta, I mean, please. If I got that map every single run, I would never complain. That would be totally fine. I absolutely love that map. There's just something about it that gets me. But you know, it's kind of surprising that the game doesn't really have much stage randomization. I recognize that it's very difficult to build that correctly in a game like this, but the only real kind of randomization is that some of the maps might have certain areas that are not accessible, like how Abyssal Depths has that cave system that's just sometimes locked. I feel like there's enough variety of where the items and teleport spawns that I don't really feel burnt out on the maps themselves. Of course, I would love to see more dynamic maps, and there are mods for that, but it's something I thought I should mention just because there's so many people who complain about the maps. The next thing we've got to talk about is your boy Mythis. Oh my goodness, the number of people that just never fight Mythis and instead just keep looping until they die or crash the game is insane. I think it's a majority amount of players just keep looping until they die. They just want to create a god run and crash the game. Mythis is such a terrible fight, they just never want to do it. And I don't blame them. Charging pillars is easily the least fun thing to do in this game. Ever since I discovered the pillar skip mod, I've never again charged pillars. It is so little fun to do, and it just feels terrible. It doesn't really solve how boring the Mythis fight can be, but it certainly helps. There are so many things to dislike about that Mythis fight. He's just a dude with a big hammer that has a bunch of one-shot attacks that he just spams over and over. It's terrible to fight him if you're a melee character. And so many of the items you collect during your run will wind up being useless during this fight. You know, on-kill items, stuff like that. And he's virtually got no vertical attacks on a massive stage that has kind of a lot of verticality. You ever look up on the Mythis stage? Dude, there's a huge arena above you. If you're an Artificer main, this is just a free win for you. Pizza Cutter is just pancreatic cancer. Phase 3 is just an entirely waste of time. Phase 4 is really the only phase that's even remotely fun, and even then, what usually happens on Phase 4 is either this phase lasts 10 seconds, you get your items back basically immediately, or you just have to hide in a corner and chip away at his health and get your items back very slowly. I do think that the back to the basics idea of this phase is pretty cool. It's just sort of executed poorly. I haven't played much of Risk of Rain Returns, but the Providence fight seems to be much more fun in almost every way. One-shot protection. Now this one is painful. There's a lot of really smart people that have spent a lot of time researching and testing how one-shot protection works. And honestly, it just sucks. It always feels like one-shot protection is bogus and doesn't work, but unfortunately, it works as intended. It's just the enemies often shoot multiple projectiles at once, right? Late game elites can have elemental effects. They can be blazing, glacial, etc. And for example, if you get hit by a blazing brass contraption, it actually counts as 2 separate hits. So one-shot protection is working as intended, it's just you were attacked by multiple hits at the same time, so it feels like you just die instantly. I honestly feel like blind pests get a lot of hate in this game, but man, those brass contraptions are rough, buddy. There's really nothing that strikes fear into my heart like hearing those little monsters flying around above me, slinging their balls around. Multiplayer is honestly kind of awful. There are so many things to complain about multiplayer as well. As soon as one person die, the scaling becomes impossible to beat. Especially if one of you die at the beginning of the stage, the other player just cannot catch back up to the scaling. Plus base game, you can't share items, so the gap between you and your buddy continues to increase, and you sort of spiral out of control as soon as you die. How many times have you played with a friend who wound up dying on a stage and just like, well, I guess he doesn't get to play anymore? That's just the reality of multiplayer in Risk of Rain 2. Multiplayer also just doesn't really work well if you have 1,000 hours and your friend just started playing the game yesterday. It's one of those games where you just sort of need to play the game on your own in order to learn the game, or else you're just going to get carried all the time. Lastly, when you play multiplayer, it doesn't really feel like a co-op experience. You just spawn in with your friends and you all scatter like ants when the lights turn on. It's really just a free-for-all. Everyone is competing for items. Lastly, can we talk about pot physics? I mean, dude, it is honestly the worst part of this game. Why is it so hard for me to place those silly little pots on those silly little buttons? Dude, I'm playing solo. I just want to get bans. It's absolutely absurd and makes the game unplayable. I'm just kidding. Sort of. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks, as always, for watching. Please let me know down below what you think is wrong with this game that you love so much. I'll see you in the next one.